Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Conversations That Matter, the second of a three-part series where we're holding conversations to reflect, discuss, and explore our inclusion and diversity journey and how we can continue to thoughtfully progress toward building a more inclusive and diverse culture and workplace. I'm your host, Will Wagner. I've been a TEKsystems team member since 1996 and our employee experience team since 2016. In this episode, we're welcoming back TEKsystems Director of Inclusion and Diversity, Franklin Reed, and we'll be joined by additional members of the TEKsystems leadership team, Jessica McNelly and Ryan Skanes. We're going to get a chance to talk about our journey towards understanding, how we're building diversity into the organization and engaging employees in meaningful dialogue to increase awareness and deeper understanding. Franklin, we heard you had so much fun sharing with us during our first episode that you wanted to come back and join us for number 2. And it's great that you brought 2 members of the Executive Inclusion Board with you, 2 longtime TEKsystems leaders, Jessica McNelly and Ryan Skanes. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
It's great to have you all here. So, Franklin, it would be great if you could kick off the introductions for us.
Great, Will. Well, I'm really excited about the opportunity to hear from 2 of our senior leaders in the company, as well as 2 members of our Executive Inclusion Board, Jess McNelly and Ryan Skanes. I'll let them do a much more fuller introduction, but I would be remiss if I didn't say a few words about their contributions to our overall inclusion and diversity strategy and, the overall culture of the company. As a reminder, our Executive Inclusion Board is made up of 20 senior leaders who serve a 2-year term. It is chaired by our president, Jay Alvaither, and co-chaired by myself. And as the co-chair, I have the privilege of engaging with all of them during our regular meetings and, events, but also on a one-on-one basis. And I've had some of the most intimate and thought-provoking and inspiring conversations during those one-on-one moments. And, one of the things that I was really clear about when I established the board were my expectations. And one of those expectations that I had of the board members is to compassionately challenge existing social and cultural norms and attitudes and behaviors that go counter to our goals. And also, I want our members to have a willingness to explore some really, sometimes some uncomfortable topics around things like race relations and privilege and, discrimination and things like that. I can say that both Jess and Ryan have jumped into the deep end of the pool. And we've had some great conversations over the course of their time on the board.
That's awesome. Thanks, Franklin. I'm excited to spend time with them and hear about their experiences. Jess, could you start out by sharing a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'd love that. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me, Franklin and Will. But as they mentioned, my name is Jessica McNelly, and I'm the executive director responsible for the Philadelphia market here for TEKsystems. And I have been with TEKsystems for just over 17 years. I got elected to the board in October of 2019, so a fairly new member. But being on the I&D board for me is really personal. And really that's because I am the daughter of 2 Cuban parents who came to the U.S. after the communist takeover of Castro in the 60s. My parents landed in Miami, as most Cubans did, as teenagers with their families, and went from really having an upper middle class upbringing in Cuba to living in a 1-bedroom apartment with 5 other people that they had never met before, not even speaking the English language.
Wow.
My grandparents on both sides fought really, really hard to rebuild and create a life for them and their children and their siblings, and managed to do that and send them to college in the U.S., which was obviously a really, really, really big accomplishment for them. I grew up in Miami, Florida, and started my career with tech there. And really being in Miami, I never remember feeling different, mainly because Miami is such a melting pot that everyone is so diverse and you become accustomed to that. But it wasn't until kind of 9 years later, since I started my journey there in Miami with TEKsystems, that I had the privilege of being promoted to the director for our Indianapolis office. And it was there that I realized that there were differences I had not known. I heard things like, "I love your accent," and "You talk really loud," which were all well-intended comments, but to be honest with you, I never knew I had an accent. So that was a really interesting journey, and one that taught me a lot, not just about life, but about who I am and what really is the meaning behind diversity and inclusion. And this helped me reflect a ton on my journey kind of before that move to Indianapolis with TEKsystems, and really how I got to the place that I am today, serving as an executive director in our company. And I realized that was purely based on hard work and some luck. But when I look back now, it is so clear that this journey for me could have been a lot easier with a clearer path. And I just didn't have that luxury. But I do believe that by bringing awareness to the importance of inclusion and the importance of diversity of thought for our company, that this will help us create a clearer path for the future generations moving forward.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks for sharing that story. Quite a legacy you're part of from your family. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Ryan, would love to hear from you as well.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, Franklin. I've been with the organization since '96, done lots of different jobs in the company, currently serve as one of our leaders in national sales, and also am responsible for our channel and alliance strategy. But been lucky enough to work with a lot of really, really great people throughout the years. I'm a Louisiana native. I spent a lot of time in New Orleans in my life, and New Orleans is an unbelievable city full of heritage. And I think a lot of people know New Orleans for its European heritage, but you got to dig a little deeper to understand that there are Creole French and Caribbean roots there that make up most of our culture, and even today most of our festivals, and even the dish that is one of my favorites, that is gumbo. There's a reason that gumbo exists, and it's very symbolic in New Orleans, because it is a mesh of a lot of different backgrounds and heritages that come together that make, in my opinion, one of the best dishes around, if you know how to make it. I've been inspired probably 10 times more than I've had a chance to contribute, in my opinion. But I believe it's about understanding, and I believe it's about context, and I believe it's about asking questions, and I believe it's about having better conversations and deeper conversations with people. Franklin brought it up earlier. It allows us, it forces us, it holds us accountable to have conversations that might have been uncomfortable in the past and might still be uncomfortable. But every single time we engage and every time we have one of those conversations, we all come away better people. So I've been honored to be a part of it, and lucky to be here today. So thank you.
Well, thank you both for sharing and being here with us today. Two things that I heard that jumped out to me. Jess, you mentioned something there that kind of referenced almost your eyes were opened through that journey in heading to Indianapolis. And Ryan, you talked about that leading with understanding, which leads to empathy, right? Both extremely important as we continue to discuss where TEKsystems is in the inclusion and diversity journey. I'm excited to explore the next chapter of this story, the present. Franklin, can you share with us where TEKsystems is in our journey toward understanding today?
Yeah, Will, that's a great question. You know, I believe we shared during the last conversation, the last podcast, that the two of the attributes that are foundational to how we define inclusivity at TEKsystems is understanding bias and then empathy. And, you can't engage, you can't understand, you can't see people without a willingness to sit face to face, eye to eye, and be willing to engage one another in a real dialogue regarding the things that impact those individuals. And so I love the fact that you use the term journey, because it is absolutely that. It's a journey toward understanding by leveraging and exercising this muscle of empathy. And the way you do that is through perspective taking. And so part of that journey for us is, really the foundation for this conversation we're having today. And that's our Conversations That Matter. And the Conversations That Matter is simply a collective pause. It's forcing us, if you will, to come together and explore, topics that are germane to our people, but topics that may be uncomfortable, but it's to exercise this muscle of empathy.
Absolutely. So you talk about Conversations That Matter, Franklin. Can you talk and share a little bit with us about how you all, right, have engaged the employees, or we've engaged the employees in these conversations around inclusion and equality in the workplace?
Yes. Well, I will tell you that the first way that we've engaged our employees is by listening. We need to be able to understand, what is impacting our employees. And so our employee experience team does a great job of creating forums and avenues for us to hear, listen to what's on the minds and the hearts of our employees. And that happens through vehicles like, the employee survey, engagement survey, but also our employee resource groups and our employee networks also are tremendous vehicles to help us understand what's on the hearts and minds of our employees. And it's that information that influences how we move forward to create these platforms to listen and to hear and to engage. And while, the initial conversation was this broad collective pause, that I'm really happy that we had well over 2,000 individuals participate in a conversation that revolved around bias and race. The desire for more is insatiable right now. Many of our teams and many of our leaders have continued to foster an environment to continue the conversation, to go deeper. And that is an indication that our people are hungry. They want to talk to each other. They want to hear from each other. And we're going to continue to do our part as an organization to create those platforms for them.
That's awesome. So could you share a little bit about how you facilitated these conversations with your team? And I think it's also important if we could hear a little bit about what your goal was as it related to going into these Conversations That Matter discussions. Jess?
Right. Normally, this Conversations That Matter, and when I first got engaged in the thought process around it, I was so excited because it was going to be, a really powerful meeting of 125 people in a room, and emotion and the passion that comes along with that. So the pivot to a virtual, Zoom WebEx was definitely, gave me some anxiety. And I think for me, primarily, I haven't been trained in leading dialogue such as this, right? So as much as it's something that I'm passionate about, it really, I had less concerns about the actual content, but more about, what can happen when I get 120 people on a WebEx to talk about issues like race and biases, So that for me was really how I felt going into it. I did have low expectations because I was a little bit concerned about the structure, but I knew how important it was. And I knew that being forced into having this conversation when we did, because of the state of the social well-being of this country and things that were going on, it was more important to get together as a group and discuss these things than it was to potentially risk, waiting until we could all be, in the same room. But really for us, I tried to take the overall goal of Conversations That Matter, as Franklin laid out so well, and create some takeaways that I felt were really important to our team specifically. So for us here in Philadelphia, the goal for our conversation was twofold. Number one, have an opportunity to listen to each other's perspectives and life stories in an effort to understand their belief system. And number two, grow a deeper level of respect for each other through understanding and empathy. And both of those things were really in an effort to build a stronger individual and team connection and create a more inclusive culture by being more aware of our biases and behaviors that honestly may be getting in the way of us truly accomplishing that. So I think my ability to somewhat tie this to something that the team needed in order to be better as a team, helped create a space where people felt the importance of not only speaking up, but also listening. That's great, Jess. That the focus on the team is so important here. And as you were talking about some of the anxiety, I don't think you used that word, but you didn't feel necessarily comfortable going into it. I can imagine there's a little bit of anxiousness around that. It sounds like you also kind of put the focus on if it leaves the heart, it enters the heart. It's a phrase I heard years ago. And that approach gets us through some of these really tough conversations that we might not necessarily know how to tackle, but we know we've got to tackle them. So thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing. Ryan, anything different or the same as you looked at those conversations you needed to facilitate, as well as some of the goals that you were focused on?
I think the only major difference is, from the time when I worked in field operations, like Jess, right, and her team, right, it's a massive team, 125 people. I don't know if people realize that. It's a massive team, and lots of different personalities and needs and ages and demographics and races and genders, and it's just a lot of individuals, right? And for us, the difference is there's new team members. There's GS team members. There's people that are on the technical side of the house. There's people that are on the sales side of the house. There's people that are on the staffing or the professional services side of the house. And some people have never even met each other. So there was a lack of knowledge there, right? So if I had anxiety, it was around that, right? Like how beneficial this was going to be, right? So I went in with I hate to say it, but I went in with probably low expectations. I didn't want the team to feel anxious about being forced to do something, right? Around, on the phone call, to Jess's point, right? On the phone call with a screen full of faces, some that they had never even spoken to before. So the first thing that I think is extremely important is to understand that we simply wanted to invite the conversation. Period. End of story. I wanted to give people a place to speak if they wanted to speak. I wanted to give people a place to, maybe exercise some emotional demon, right, that had been piling up, and they just wanted to talk about it with someone, right, and know that it was okay to talk about it. And then I think that the next part is, when you're in a situation like that, I think it's really, really important to be vulnerable. We're just people just like they are, right? And we have stories and backgrounds just like they do. So we started it off that way. I told a little bit of my story and the way some of the things that have happened in society, and a lot of the injustices that continue to happen, quite frankly, affected me and people that I know, and some of the unbelievably disheartening stories that I've heard, right? And just open it up that way. And I think the biggest surprise for me was I expected some of the tenured leaders to be the ones that sort of took over the conversation, and it was the opposite. It was the newer members and the younger members that showed some real deep concern for what had happened and what still is happening, and they spoke up about it. And when they did, it really, really opened up the line of conversation for everyone. And we ended up going 2.5 hours when we were scheduled for an hour. But there was nothing more important than that conversation at the time. So low expectations in the beginning that I think we nailed. Now, Franklin talks about this all the time, and I think the biggest difference at the end of the day is, the accountability we have around this today is different than it's ever been. So it's continuing to have the conversations. It's continuing to set up places, whether it's virtual or not, it doesn't matter, right, to allow people to speak from the heart. So
absolutely. I love what you said there, Ryan, about invite the conversation. And what I heard also there was, when you invite that conversation, you get to hear a different voice. Which that is all about inclusion right there. Diverse thought and then that inclusion piece. And it's no secret that why you both are in leadership roles. I mean, one of the greatest attributes any leader can have is vulnerability. I appreciate you, both of you sharing and sharing how you felt as you walked in these conversations, and sharing with your team as well. People want to follow that. So thank you for that. Jess, was there anything you heard during your conversations that surprised you?
Yeah, I think what surprised me the most had to have been the diversity of speakers. And really, Ryan talked about it. And we had a very similar experience in our meeting where the people that spoke up tended to be the least tenured, which I was very surprised by. I think about some of our regular business meetings, and these people, I can't even get them to speak up when I ask them a direct question half the time. So it was such an interesting dynamic to see the passion of that specific group. And I don't know that I was expecting that. So that was definitely a surprise. But I think the thing that came out of it that I wasn't necessarily expecting was just the wide variety of people that shared, that had such different and diverse stories, which not only created a really large impact based on like the differences and, oh, wow, I didn't realize how different, these people's experience had been, but also the commonalities between them. And I think that wasn't something that I was thinking about going into it, but was really something that showed up that many people commented about as we were kind of wrapping up, which was really neat to see.
That is a great point. We tend to have more in common than we understand sometimes. And through these discussions and conversations that gets brought out. Ryan, what have you heard or seen from your team since these conversations?
I think the easiest way to describe this is one, I think the relationships were sort of fast forwarded, right? Because there were follow-up calls from maybe someone on the team that was more tenured and worked in a different area, right? That had no business reason whatsoever to follow up with a younger person that worked in a different organization or a different area of the organization, right? So the follow-up and the relationships, they for whatever reason, right? We do everything that we can to hope that help our relationships flourish when we can't be together face to face, right? In an office every single day, right? And so I think that's what sort of surprised me in a way is that, I didn't think about that as a way to foster stronger relationships much, much faster than we have in the past. Will, you and I know that, Jess, you probably heard this too, right? If you grew up in any business organization back in the day, you were supposed to stay away from politics and religion. At all costs, you were supposed to stay away from politics and religion. So it's just funny to me that and eye-opening to me that when you flip that around and say that anything is okay to talk about and that we invite the fact that's the only time you understand, that's the only time you uncover those differences and more important, Jess, to your point, that all of us have similarities. We all have those, and we all are so much more similar than we give ourselves credit for. But if you don't uncover things like that, by the way, race, religion, politics, you name, ask the questions and have the conversation and be understanding, right? Because it's meaningful. It's more meaningful conversation than we normally have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jess, for you, what have you seen in the team since these conversations?
What I have seen is a higher level of confidence from that group specifically. I talked a little bit about just kind of what surprised me and just that group of less tenure really speaking up. And they have this renewed sense of confidence. And I really think it comes from this level of comfortability for them that they've put their story out there and it was well received. And people have come up to them and asked them to hear more and they want to know more about them. And I think that feeling of authenticity allows them to show up more confident. And I've seen that throughout the team in many occasions.
Wow. Both of you just sharing how it's changed your teams and some of the dynamics is giving me chills. You can't see it because we're on a podcast, but it's giving me chills. And it's awesome. We have to hit pause sometimes, right? It's that slow down to speed up. And we are both talking about there is that our relationships have gotten deeper. We've got folks that are showing up with more confidence, taking ownership in conversations because we were able to kind of hit pause and have these discussions and conversations, and they're showing up completely different. That's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic. Jess, as you look back at your experiences, over the years with TEKsystems, and then you look at these current times and these conversations that we're having, how do you see these conversations fitting into our broader journey of inclusion and diversity at TEKsystems?
Yeah, it's a great question, Will. And, this really has been a journey of both learning and understanding across these last 17 years, for me personally, but also, for the company as they've gone through this journey as an entity. And these conversations are really forcing the issues that we face with inclusion and diversity to be more commonplace topics, right? Ryan talked about it earlier. When we started 17 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it was not 5 years ago. It was not commonplace to be talking about social injustices, to be talking about political views, to be talking about race. Those weren't things that you brought into the workplace, but then it didn't allow people to really come across authentically. And therefore, when you think about this journey of really inclusion and diversity, you're actually blocking the one thing that is most important. And really proud of where the company's come in really a short amount of time throughout this journey. But they have opened the door for really, not only to allow, but also expect that our people, are asking questions versus just giving statements, which really fosters an environment of more empathy, less bias, and allows us to progress in this journey of inclusion and diversity.
I love that. Asking questions more than just giving statements. And, it's no secret that we have been on a journey over the years, tackling this opportunity that inclusion and diversity can bring us. And Ryan, you and I, we've seen it. It's well intentioned over those years, right? But some progress, you've seen some progress more than others, right? That's just the reality. What is different about where we are right now?
I think for me, it's twofold. The first thing I'll say is, we don't have a choice here. Like if we really sit back and think about our business, both internally and externally, both our people and our customers and our consultants, right? The only way we grow and the only way we grow into the future and thrive for everyone in this organization, for our consultants, for our customers, right, is to become that organization. And oh, by the way, we're probably on the precipice of one of the largest transitions of EIT to cloud in our company's history, right? And we're going to need assistance from people with different ideas and different ways of doing things and different backgrounds that probably come from different organizations from time to time, right? I think that's if when people ask that, right? I think that is an enormous responsibility, but I think probably the bigger change that I've seen and what I'm so happy about, I don't want to talk too good about Franklin and give him a big head, right? But the fact of the matter is there's accountability this time. There's no other way to say it. That's the way I see it. I've been here since '96, just like you will, right? And it's always been well-attentioned, and it's always been talked about, and it's always been discussed, right? There's follow-through there this time. There's teeth. There's a group of 20 individuals that work with Franklin and a team that works with Franklin on a daily basis to hold us accountable to get things done in lots of different areas. This shows up in lots of different areas of the organization, from the way we hire people to the way we interview people to the way we find talent to the way we advocate for people, to the way we give people voices, right? There's teeth to it this time. There's accountability. And that makes me proud. It makes me really, really proud to be a part of it because I know it's not going away. And it's going to make us better every single day that we embrace it.
Like any team, right? You need to have accountability in that team. We need to push each other. I mean, I think that all of us joined this organization because we could be part of a team, right? We all have a role to play on this team. And I think that as we look at the kind of overarching goal that we put our focus on from an I&D perspective, we all have roles to play. Jess, I'd love to hear from you on what advice you can give others, the individual roles, players that are on these teams that might not be on the executive inclusion board and might not be in the role of director of inclusion and diversity, but the folks that are out there in the field, in the offices, how can they continue to play a role in this journey?
Yeah, Will, when you ask that question, the first thing that comes to mind is one of the many words from one of our executive vice presidents, Matt Hannigan, and it's you need to be intellectually curious. Right. And while we typically use that term in response to learning of our customers' business needs, I truly believe that the same applies here. Moving the needle on inclusion and diversity for a company our size can honestly feel like a bear. And that speaks to a lot of the journey that Ryan spoke about what's different now. But truly, the growth happens with each individual person doing their part to ask an additional question, or make a better decision because they eliminated their bias, or even showing empathy when someone else needs it. And if you take that one individual doing one of those things and making that difference, and that impact is multiplied across a company, that's how difference is made. So that's it. Do your part as individuals, as part of this company on this journey.
That is great feedback. So we know a strong I&D culture requires the commitment of individuals. Just like you said, Jess, we've got to be bought in. We all have to do our part, and those folks across the organization. And also, it holds leaders accountable for fostering this inclusive leadership. But we as individuals need to play those roles as well. So Franklin, can you share a little bit, though, how TEKsystems has invested in I&D at that leadership level?
Yeah, I sure can. And I do want to say to Ryan, I know there's a massive bromance between the two of us. So it's too late. My head is big. I absolutely can talk about what we're doing with our leaders. Let me first say it this way. Before talking about our leaders, let's talk about how I describe my role. Whenever anyone asks what I do, I usually say that I'm driving organizational and behavior change. And I just happen to be doing it via an inclusion and diversity platform. And the reason I describe it this way is because organizational and behavior change across any organization, it requires a bunch of different components. But if you're really going to be successful, I think one of the most critical components is that you have leaders modeling the change that you're trying to drive. And when I think of leaders, I actually think of two classifications. We're talking about the individual who doesn't have a title or a role of leader, but they're on the front line. And we, talked about our ERG leaders on the last podcast. And so they're definitely on the front line. But I'm also talking about the leader that has a title and the leader that has a role, who is intentional about modeling the change. And so, to narrow my answer to your question, specifically around the leaders that have a title and that's their role, I'll start with our most senior leader, our president. In Jay Alvater in 2018, he signed the CEO Action Pledge. And he was really clear with me when he signed it. And he said that if we're going to sign this pledge, then we're going to uphold not just the letter of the pledge, but the spirit of what the pledge was asking us to commit to. And there were 3 commitments. 2 of them were organizational commitments, and 1 of them was a personal commitment that he was going to make himself. And the 2 organizational commitments have really become the foundation of the board's initial strategy. The first one was to have a very real and long-term focus on unconscious bias, and to explore the impact that it has on the decisions that we make for our people and for the business. And Ryan talked about how this shows up in a bunch of different places. To date, we've had over 1,200 of our people leaders participate in the formal training, and we've got plans to really infuse this into the training and development plans of every individual in the company. The second pledge of the CEO Action Pledge was an agreement that we would make as a company to pause, to create space, to see, to hear, and to understand each other. And that became the foundation, or the impetus, I should say, for the Conversations That Matter series. And ironically, I heard both Jess and Ryan talk about a little bit of anxiety as they were going into the conversation. Let me tell you, the Friday before we were going to start the conversations that next week, I was getting dressed and I was looking in the mirror and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm asking hundreds of leaders to have a conversation about bias and race, and most of them are white. What am I thinking? But I knew that our leaders would lean into it and could handle it. So, I absolutely had some anxiety as well. But finally, just the last commitment that Jay made was his own personal commitment as the president. And that commitment was to go deeper and to go on a personal journey, a journey to learn and to explore and to lean into some uncomfortable, subject matter. And I can tell you that Jay and I have had some very real and emotional personal conversations that are not surface level by any means. And I also know he's done it with some other folks across the organization. And so the way we've been holding our leaders accountable is just that. We've been leaning into unconscious bias training and looking for and exploring the different systems and norms that unintentionally reinforce them. And one of the ways that we've done it is that we've rolled out what we call our transparency of opportunity, which really is to infuse just greater fairness and equity in the promotional process. And it goes beyond just, communicating broadly about an opportunity. It includes things like a diverse panel, a diverse slate of candidates, a consistent experience, direct developmental feedback to all of the participants. And yeah, it's a lot of extra work that a hiring manager has to do, but the outcomes of that investment on a few extra hours far outweighs what we gain. And then I guess the last thing is, accountability itself. What gets measured gets done, and to ensure that we continue down this path of progress.
Thanks for sharing that, Franklin. I know there's been a lot of effort, like you mentioned, that have been put in at a leadership level. I mean, there's no doubt this is absolutely an all-in team effort for every one of us, where we're going to be taking on some challenges. But it makes me excited as well because we have tackled some big, challenging goals as a team, and I look forward to see where we're going to go in the future. As we wrap up our conversations, I do have two questions for both Jess and Ryan. So they are, right, one, where have you seen the most progress or impact of the Executive Inclusion Board initiatives? And number two, what has been your personal growth during this experience? Jess, I'll let you start us out.
Sure. Thank you. That first question, I've been on the board 9 months, and the only way I know how to answer that is all of it. And I think the reason I say that is because the beauty of the Inclusion Board is that it really is a cross-function of leaders that are bringing different perspectives. And this allows us to split up and to make smaller committees within the board into different areas and create tangible plans on how we will bring this progress and this initiative, the progress to these initiatives. And that's really unique and special. But I think it's allowed us to really see lift across the board on all these rocks that we're moving throughout the organization. I think for me personally, I have learned so much in these short 9 months that I've been on the board. And, being a Hispanic woman, I know the challenges that I personally have faced, but there are by no means the same as other people that may be coming from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different perspectives in life. And I've learned a lot through that process. And I've learned that I also have a lot of biases based on the way that I was, raised and my belief system and my perspective on life. And that's just as important. And I may have never realized that those biases existed in the way that they did. But because of the opportunity I've had to have conversations with Franklin, with Ryan, with multiple people on the board that have opened my eyes to just different ways of thinking and ways of creating perspective for others as well. So for me, I've gotten not only, the skill to do that through the education that we've created through bias training and different books and learning, but really the passion to do better here and to help others do better here and to really move the rock within our organization. So for me, I started out by saying what a personal journey this is for me and how personal it is for me to be part of helping transform our company. But just being here 9 months, I've seen so much, and it's given me an inside look of how far we've come, and really, more importantly, what our future plans are, which get me really, really excited.
What I'll tell you is, it feels very much like the conversations have multiplied times 1,000. That's what it feels like. It feels like every corner of the business somehow has been affected in a way where you move from a next-gen market conversation to an interview in GS to something in the back office or the front office or a leadership opportunity. And part of the conversation is either advocacy or open mind around biases. It's becoming commonplace, right? It was never commonplace before. That was the mistake that we made. It was never commonplace before. So that's actually what excites me more than anything. Is it's infiltrating every little piece, nook, cranny of our organization, right? And it's really, really awesome to see, right? I don't even think that we've come close to the benefits for this organization and the people in this organization that we'll see in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, because it's just now spreading itself across the entire platform, and it's amazing to see. For me personally, it's deeper connections. I have been involved in and witness to many more opening lines in a conversation revolving around how are you and how can I help than I've ever seen at any other time. If you start the conversations out with how are you doing and how can I help, I think it changes the conversation completely. And I've been witness to dozens and dozens and dozens of those conversations, and it just makes me smile every time.
Awesome. Our relationships get deeper. There's no doubt about it. Well, thank you both for being real today and absolutely being an inspiration. If our listeners do want to hear more from you, which I know they do, where should they follow you on social media, Jess?
Yes. So Twitter at Jessica McNally. Or, of course, I'm on Facebook as well, Instagram at Jess McNally 11. So any of those options.
Awesome. And Ryan, you still have your MySpace account?
I still got MySpace. It's up. I'll send the URL out to everyone. No, I do not. Will, I'm not that old. I actually am that old. No, I'm probably most active at Arskanes1 on Twitter, and then LinkedIn is probably where I'm mostly active. And I'm slowly getting drug into several other platforms by either someone in the organization or my children. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see how that goes.
Kids do that to us, dude. Perfect. And Franklin, you?
On LinkedIn, you can find me at Franklin Reed, and on Twitter, you can find me at Franklin T. Reed.
Awesome. Hey, Franklin, can you talk a little bit about kind of where we're going next? A little teaser, let me say, for our next episode of Conversations That Matter.
Well, we are in the process as we speak of designing what that conversation is going to look like. And so I don't want to put too much out there, but what I can say is it is a conversation that is going to give every single person an opportunity to reflect and contribute. And so I'm really excited about where we're going.
Awesome. Hey, thank you, everybody, for sharing a snapshot of where we are today in our inclusion and diversity journey. I'm excited to learn more about the future in our next episode. And we appreciate all of you who joined us for this episode of Conversations That Matter. Stay tuned for the next episode when we'll get the opportunity to learn more about what's next as it relates to inclusion and diversity at TEKsystems.